Hello, everyone. It's time for the next daily devotional here. We're up to Thursday in our week on the cross. This is devotional number 5, and it's called Reconciled through the Cross. And the text is Colossians 1:15 through 20. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers. All things have been created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross. When Jill Duffield, and we're, for those of you using Lent in plain sight, one of the things she talks about in this section is she talks about the idea of estrangement, arguments, divisions. Every family, every congregation, every community, anytime you have a group together, there's always challenges that you face in your life together for a variety of reasons. People have different personalities, they have different ideas. We make a lot of assumptions on what we think others know and don't know, and how we think they should behave or not behave. And so when we invest deeply in something, when it means a lot to us, we struggle sometimes to maintain that connection, to see the other person as we want to be seen, especially when we just have personalities that don't mesh well. It's not uncommon in any group at all to have things like that happen. I mean, when I think about the number of arguments, okay, let's just say fights, I got into with my sister when we were growing up, and we were 8 years apart in age. There were tons of them. We did not get along. We get along great now. In part, I joke because we live 1,000 miles away from each other. I'm kidding, Karen. But part of it is that we understand each other better. We have very different personalities. We don't see things the same way. There are both things that we're very passionate about, but Karen's much more, let's go get it, let's go do it, and it's got to be right now, and I'll make that phone call, and let's just get this fixed. Whereas I'm more apt to sit back and say, let's just wait and see what happens. Let's just hold. We don't have to decide this minute. It's okay. And so we just tend to do things differently. So when we travel as a family, I just let her plan things. It's just simpler. But there's a lot of things where people just don't always get on. It's just part of being in a group. And when we face a relationship unraveling, which we know that can get really bad. I mean, relationships can end in divorce and permanent separation. You have people who, big arguments, people are unable to forgive one another, or the guilt that we carry knowing we were wrong, but we don't want to admit it. It's in the cross of Jesus that we have hope for healing from all those things. Despite the reality that things fall apart here on earth. I mean, we see it all the time, that things they fall apart. Nothing lasts forever in this life. It's the cross that holds everything together. That's the focal point. That's the fulcrum on which everything turns. That's the point, is the cross. And through the cross, God reconciled everything. All things. No wound is too great, is too grievous for God to heal. Reconciliation is never impossible. Now, not all estrangement between people ends in reconciliation in this life. Divorces happen. Congregations split. People, take grudges to the grave, which is sad and unfortunate, but it does happen. But we know that not even death can stop the love of God. Nothing can. The cross holds all things together, brings all things together, and draws us all together in the end. This passage in Colossians, there's a lot of language in the beginning of our book of order about Jesus being the head of the church that comes right from this passage, that, he's the head of the body, the church. He's the beginning, the firstborn of the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. When I was taking theology many years ago, my professor drove me crazy because he made us read so much Karl Barth. And I have all 14 volumes of Karl Barth. I will admit I have not read them all. I thought about that during this whole pandemic thing, but right now I'm stressed enough as it is, so reading Barth will not help me. And but the thing that always got me about Barth is it took him thousands of pages and 14 volumes to tell us one thing. The answer is always Jesus Christ. Always. Everything in heaven and on earth has to go through Christ. Everything. Now, your theology is very often determined based on where you begin. What's the driving issue? What's the problem you're trying to work your way through? And so you can find out a lot about any given theologian by where they begin. Do they begin with the issue of sin? Do they begin with the issue of reconciliation? Do they begin with the understanding of God? Where do they begin? And for Barth, the beginning, the end, and all points in between, the answer is always Jesus Christ. Always. Doesn't really matter where he begins. That's always the answer. And once I understood that, then it all made sense. Because I could then view Barth as this huge maze or puzzle, like paths in a maze. And every single one of them eventually, however long it took, wound its way back around to Jesus in the middle. Every time. And so passages like this one are always a good reminder that those of us who are Christians, this is the answer right here. The answer is always Jesus. Now, how we get there might be different. And how we eventually wind our way around might not look the same. But the answer is always Jesus. No matter what our issue, our estrangement, our problem, our division here on earth, we can find our answer in Christ. That's what we have to remember. And Christ doesn't change. Jesus is the same always. And so we need to figure out where is Jesus, because that's where we'll find our answer. So here's a couple of questions that got included. When have you experienced estrangement? And if you were reconciled, how did that happen? Reconciliation can be really tough. Peacemaking is not an easy thing to do. It's very difficult sometimes because some people don't want to reconcile, not ever. Sometimes it just takes time. And sometimes you have to live with the knowledge that that person will always bear a grudge. And that's the reality of the situation. Not everybody's ready to change at the same time. Are there relationships you are called to work on for reconciliation? And what would facilitate healing? And I think that's going to depend on every relationship. It's going to be a little different. They're all not going to require the same thing. Some will require, a lot of apology. Some might require time and distance. Some might require actually spending time together and finding out how it is that you're separated. It all depends. But we always need to look to Christ and the cross to be our guide, to be our linchpin to all things. That through the cross, God reconciled all things. There is nothing in this world, no wound too great, that can't be healed by Christ and the cross. I hope you enjoyed this devotional, and there'll be plenty more coming. So we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.